The land burned beneath a ruthless sun. Dust lifted in thin spirals and carried the scent of death. Shrubs bent in the hot wind, and insects swarmed above a dry pool. High in the sky, dark birds circled with slow wings. They waited for weakness, and they saw it below. A lone Allosaurus moved through the plain with eyes sharp and body lean. Hunger pressed in like a shadow at its side. Each step grew heavier as silence ruled the world. Nothing here came without risk. Could the hunter find life before death found it first? The world of the late Cretaceous was harsh yet full of opportunity for the few who could survive its daily trials. Across the open plains of South America, a predator walked with a mix of confidence and hunger. This predator was the Allosaurus. Its body was built for speed, and its long tail acted as a counterweight for sharp movements during the hunt. At first glance, it was smaller than some of the giants that share its land, yet it carried the heart of a relentless survivor. The land tested every creature, and only those with strength and wit could endure. The Allosaurus moved through a patchwork of dry earth broken by scattered shrubs and trees. The heat pressed down with no mercy, and the air shimmered above the ground as if the land itself was aflame. Herds of small plant eaters drifted at the edges of sight. They raised their heads, often with sharp ears, turning to catch the faintest hint of danger. They had good reason to be nervous, for predators like the Allosaurus lurked in every shadow. The tension between hunter and prey shaped the rhythm of this ancient world. Life for the Allosaurus was never simple. Unlike the larger predators, such as a massive Giganotosaurus, it could not rely only on brute force. Instead, it depended on agility, keen senses, and timing. The hunter had to move fast, strike without hesitation, and vanish before a stronger rival could appear. Allosaurus thrived in the space between boldness and caution. To hesitate meant starvation. To take a foolish risk meant being crushed by something bigger. Balance was survival. The plains it hunted on stretched wide like an ocean of earth. Streams cut to the ground, though many dried under the relentless sun. When water became scarce, the pools that remained became centers of both life and death. Herds crowded around them, trampling the ground into mud. Predators waited nearby, knowing thirst would eventually force prey into vulnerable positions. The Allosaurus often lingered near such places, for it knew that hunger and desperation often broke the strongest defenses. It had rivals everywhere. Raptors with sickle claws roamed in packs and could overwhelm an unguarded hunter. Giant carnivores towered over the land and claimed carcasses with power alone. Even scavengers like crocodiles or massive birds threatened to steal a hard-won meal. The Allosaurus lived in constant tension, but that tension sharpened it. Every day was a test of skill. Every victory meant another sunrise. Every failure carried the weight of possible death. Despite the danger, there was rhythm in its life. Dawn often brought cool air and gave the hunter the chance to move before the sun grew fierce. It could stalk shadows cast by tall trees and approach herds before they grew fully alert. Noon burned the earth and forced many creatures into shade. Evening softened the land again, and the air filled with the calls of life, both fearful and bold. For the Allosaurus, each part of the day offered a different chance. It simply needed to seize the right one. The story of this lone Allosaurus begins at such a moment. Hunger gnawed deeper than usual. Days of empty hunts had stretched its body thin and sharpened its temper. Yet its eyes still gleamed with determination. Survival demanded boldness now more than ever. Across the plain, distant movement stirred. Herds clustered near a watering hole, and the scent of life drifted on the hot wind. Opportunity had risen again, but the hunter knew one truth above all others. In this world, every chance carried danger, and every step forward could awaken something waiting in silence. Hunger had driven the Allosaurus into risk before, but now the feeling cut deeper than ever. Its ribs pressed faintly against its skin, showing how many hunts had ended in failure. For 3 days the plains had offered little. Small prey scattered too quickly, while larger herds had been well defended. Each failed attempt left the predator weaker. Each empty hour drained its strength. It could not endure much longer without food. The morning air carried the scent of water, and with it the unmistakable trace of life. The Allosaurus raised its head and tested the wind. Its nostrils flared wide as it picked up the smell of fresh meat mixed with dust and mud. Muscles tightened. This was no distant dream. This was real prey, close enough to find. It followed the current of the air across a stretch of dry earth toward the only pool of water left in this part of the land. As the hunter approached, it slowed to avoid being seen. The long tail swayed for balance, while each step fell with calculated silence. The watering hole came into view. Herds had gathered there already. Young hadrosauruses huddled near the edge, while adults stood in a wide circle protecting them. They drank cautiously and raised their heads often. Their calls rippled across the air like warnings. The Allosaurus crouched low behind a line of dry bushes and watched. Opportunity hung thick in the air, but so did danger. The herd was large and well guarded. To rush into them, without care meant certain group, stood one weaker hadrosaur. Its flank carried a limp perhaps from an old wound. It drank slower than the rest and kept distance from the center. This was the opening the hunter needed. Its heart quickened and its eyes narrowed. This was the prey that hunger demanded. The Allosaurus crept closer. It kept the herd between itself and the water, so the wind masked its scent. The weak hadrosaur shifted again and bent its head low. For a moment the hunter's muscles coiled tight, ready to launch. Then the air changed. Another scent rolled across the wind, strong and sharp with the bitterness of blood. The Allosaurus froze. This was no prey animal. This was the smell of another predator. From the far side of the watering hole, movement stirred. Out of the tall reeds stepped a rival hunter. Another Allosaurus, but larger and heavier. Its scar hide told stories of past battles, and its confident stride revealed a predator used to taking what it wanted. The smaller hunter's pulse raced. Hunger had already pushed it to the edge of risk, and now the danger had doubled. The herd reacted instantly. They cried out and pressed together in a tight mass. The weak hadrosaur stumbled back into the safety of the group. The chance had slipped away. The rival predator advanced with slow, steady steps, and its eyes locked on the smaller Allosaurus. The silent message was clear. This was its ground. This was its hunt. The smaller hunter backed away, but the gnaw of hunger screamed within its chest. If it left now, there might not be another chance for days. Step back meant weakness, and weakness meant death. It had to make a choice. Challenge a rival and risk everything or retreat into emptiness. The weight of the moment pressed like stone. The rival gave a low rumble that shook through the air. The smaller predator answered with a hiss and a sharp snap of its jaws. The herd scattered in panic, leaving only the two hunters staring across the trampled ground. Dust swirled around them as if the earth itself sensed a storm about to break. In that single instant, the smaller Allosaurus understood its path. This was no longer just about food. This was about survival itself. To endure, it would have to stand against a stronger rival and prove it was worthy of the land. Hunger had become more than a need. It had become a spark that lit the fire of conflict. The first true battle of its life was about to begin. The dust hung heavy in the air long after the rivals stepped into the watering hole. The herd of hadrosaurs had fled into the trees, their thundering feet shaking the ground. Only the two predators remained. They watched each other with unblinking eyes. The smaller Allosaurus could hear the slow rumble of its own breath and the pounding beat of its heart, yet the rival made no sudden move. It simply lowered its head to drink, while keeping one golden eye fixed on its opponent. The message could not be clearer. This place and this prey belonged to it. For several long moments, the smaller hunter remained still. Its tail twitched and its claws dug furrows into the dirt. Hunger screamed for action, yet instinct urged caution. A direct clash now would be death. The rival was stronger, its chest broad, and its jaws lined with scars that told of victories in other battles. Slowly, the smaller Allosaurus retreated step by step until the reeds swallowed it. The larger hunter gave no chase. It had already claimed its dominance. The smaller hunter wandered into the plains again, body low, ears alert. Every muscle burned with frustration. Hunger gnawed deeper than before. Still it had learned something vital. Another predator now ruled this stretch of land. Every hunt would be contested. Every victory would come at a cost. The rising sun cast long shadows across the dry earth as the Allosaurus moved on, searching for a chance. That chance arrived 2 nights later beneath the pale glow of the moon. The hunter followed the smell of flesh carried on a cool breeze. It crept along a dry ravine and found the carcass of a fallen iguanodon half buried in dust. Flies buzzed thick around its wounds. The smaller predator's teeth flashed in the dim light as it lunged and tore into the soft hide. Blood thick and heavy filled its mouth. Relief flooded through its body as strength began to return. Then came the sound. Heavy footfalls from the ridge above. The rival. Its silhouette appeared against the stars, and its roar echoed through the canyon. The smaller predator froze, its jaws still wet with blood. The rival bounded down the slope, spraying rocks and dust. The smaller hunter bolted back, retreating from the carcass. The rival lunged forward and claimed the fallen iguanodont with ease. Another meal lost. Another wound to pride. The smaller Allosaurus lingered in the shadows, watching. Every bite the rival took hardened its resolve. This could not continue. To survive, it needed to hunt smarter. It needed to grow bolder. Days passed and the struggle deepened. Each hunt turned into a dangerous dance. When the smaller hunter pursued a flock of small ornithopods, a rival appeared from the grass, forcing the prey to scatter. When it cornered a young sauropod by a rocky cliff, the rival's roar drove it away. Even when it tried to scavenge the bones of a long-dead carcass, the rival struck, first seizing the scraps. Hunger returned with a vengeance. The smaller predator's ribs showed sharp beneath its skin. But weakness did not crush it. Instead, it forced change. The hunter began to stalk not only prey but the rival itself. It studied the way the larger predator moved. It noted how it struck from open ground, relying on raw power. It saw how the rival tired quickly after long chases, and how it drank deeply at the same pools again and again. Patterns emerged. Strength did not mean perfection. Even the dominant hunter had flaws. One evening, clouds gathered thick and heavy. The air pressed close with the weight of coming storms. The smaller predator crept along a ridge, following the faint trail of a herd of dinosaurs. Lightning flickered in the distance as the herd scattered near a fallen tree. The hunter chose its moment. With a burst of speed, it lunged from the rocks and brought down one of the slower stragglers. At last, a clean kill. Its teeth sank deep as thunder rolled above. But triumph was short-lived. From the shadows, the rival appeared once more. Its roar split the storm. The smaller predator dragged its kill back, desperate to protect it. The rival struck hard, biting into the dinosaur's neck and wrenching it free. The two predators clashed for the first time, their bodies colliding with bone-shattering force. Teeth slashed. Mud sprayed as they struggled for control of the carcass. The smaller hunter was thrown back, its flank torn open. The rival seized a kill and dragged it away. Rain began to fall, drenching the ground. The smaller Allosaurus limped into the tree's body, battered, spirit burning. That night, under the storm, it made a silent vow. The rival could take kills again and again, but the fight was not finished. This was not defeat, but the beginning of something greater. The days that followed were a blur of recovery and planning. The smaller predator nursed its wounds by the shelter of rocks, licking blood from its skin. It learned to move with patience again, waiting for moments when the rival was absent. It caught smaller prey, swift ornithopods and lizards that darted between trees. The kills were meager, but enough to regain strength. Each bite hardened muscle, each day built resolve. The rival, meanwhile, grew more reckless. Confident in its size, it charged openly into herds, scattering them with brute force. The smaller predator watched from a distance and saw the toll. The rival's wounds healed slowly. Its sides heaved with exhaustion after every hunt. It was strong, yes, but not endless. The smaller predator understood that dominance could shift. The turning point came with the dry season's harshest week. Waterholes shrank to muddy pits. Grass turned to brittle stalks. Prey animals grew, desperate, moving farther and farther in search of green. Both hunters followed them across cracked plains and rocky hills. One evening, as the sun bled red over the horizon, a herd of hadrosaurs gathered by a riverbed. The smaller predator stalked them with care, moving low through reeds. But before it could strike, the rival appeared from the opposite side. The herd bolted in panic. Dust clouds rose high into the sky. In that chaos, the smaller Allosaurus did not retreat. Instead, it lunged at the flank of the herd, cutting off a straggler. The rival roared and charged forward, teeth bared. The two hunters met in a storm of claws and teeth. The prey escaped, but the clash deepened. They circled one another, their bodies heaving with rage. Though battered, the smaller predator held its ground. For the first time, it did not flee. The rival snapped, but met jaws that snapped back. The ground trembled beneath their weight. Blood stained the dust. Finally, the rival turned away, dragging its wounded leg. The smaller hunter watched with unblinking eyes. Something had shifted. The balance of power was no longer fixed. From then on, every encounter carried higher stakes. They fought over carcasses, they fought over herds, they fought simply to test each other's will. Each battle left scars carved into hide and memory. Hunger had forged them into enemies, yet also into reflections. One fought with brute force, the other with cunning patience. As the dry season reached its peak, the land itself seemed to demand resolution. Prey grew scarcer, water holes almost vanished. The hunters could not both survive here. The rising tension pressed toward one inevitable moment. A final clash awaited, one that would decide who ruled and who fell. The sun hung low over the barren plain, a molten disk, sinking toward the jagged horizon. Heat shimmered from the cracked earth. Dust swirled in thin spirals. Every creature that could flee had already vanished into the distance. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. For days, the two hunters had circled each other, leaving blood on the soil and echoes of their roars in the canyons. Tonight would end it. There was no more prey to share, no more space to divide. Only one would remain. The smaller Allosaurus stood still beneath the broken remains of a dead tree. Its muscles trembled not from weakness but from readiness. Hunger carved sharp lines along its ribs, yet fire burned in its eyes. Every scar across its body told a story of survival. It had learned patience, it had learned cunning, it had learned how to endure. The rival had power, but power alone would not be enough now. A rumble grew across the plain. Heavy footfalls approached. The rival emerged from the haze like a storm given flesh. Dust clung to its hide, and scars traced its flanks. Its jaws opened in a roar that shook the ground. This was its land, its prey, its rule. It would not surrender. The smaller predator answered with a roar of its own voice, raw but unbroken. The sound carried across the wind a challenge carved from desperation and defiance. Then silence. The two hunters circled each other, tails raised, claws gouging the dirt. The rival struck first, lunging with terrifying speed, jaws wide. The smaller Allosaurus twisted aside, feeling the rush of hot air as teeth snapped inches from its hide. It struck back low, aiming for the leg. Teeth sank into flesh, drawing blood. The rival bellowed and swung its tail like a whip. The blow cracked against the smaller predator's ribs, sending shock through its body. Pain flared, but it did not release. Its jaws tightened, dragging the rival down. Both crashed into the dirt, thrashing. Dust erupted around them. The rival rolled and slashed with claws carving into the smaller hunter's shoulder. The smaller predator staggered back, chest heaving. The rival rose, towering above it, eyes blazing with fury. Blood streamed from its wounded leg, but it still pressed forward. The smaller Allosaurus changed tactics. Instead of retreating, it darted sideways, circling fast. Each feint forced the rival to turn its heavy body. Each turned deep in the strain in its injured leg. The rival snapped its jaws again, but met only air. Rage built. It charged headlong, desperate to crush the smaller foe beneath brute strength. That was the moment. The smaller predator pivoted aside and lunged the throat. Its teeth clamped down with savage force. The rival thrashed wildly, its roar choked by tearing flesh. It slammed the smaller hunter into the ground again and again. Bones rattled. Stars flashed behind its eyes. Still it did not release. Its jaws locked tighter, sinking deeper. Hot blood poured into its mouth, flooding the dust. The rival fought with every ounce of strength. Its claws ripped bloody furrows. Its tail struck with bone-cracking force. Yet the smaller predator clung, undriven by more than hunger. This was survival. This was destiny. Inch by inch, the rival's roars weakened. Its struggles grew slower. At last, its massive body shuddered one final time, then fell still. Silence returned. The smaller Allosaurus staggered back, jaws dripping with blood, chest heaving in exhaustion. The rival lay motionless, its golden eyes dim. The plain smelled of iron and dust. Waves of heat shimmered above the body. The fight was finished. The balance of power had shifted. The smaller predator no longer looked small. It stood tall, scarred and battered, but victorious. It did not roar. There was no need. The land itself had heard the battle. The wind carried the scent of death across the plain, announcing the end of the rivalry. The survivor lowered its head to the carcass and tore a strip of flesh free. The taste of victory was heavy in its mouth. But more than victory, it tasted freedom. No longer would its hunt be stolen. No longer would its path be blocked. This land was its own now. Each scar was a crown. Each wound was proof of worth. It had risked everything and endured. As the sun slipped below the horizon and the first stars glimmered above, the Allosaurus stood over the fallen rival. The night belonged to it. The world had tested it again and again, and at last it had answered. The plain lay silent after the storm of violence. Dust still drifted in the air like ghostly smoke rising from the battlefield. The carcass of the fallen rival stretched across the cracked ground, a mountain of lifeless muscle and bone. Flies had already begun to swarm, drawn by the smell of blood and death. The smaller Allosaurus stood beside its conquest sides, heaving with ragged breaths. Its body trembled from strain, each movement sending sharp pain through ribs and torn flesh. Victory had come at a cost. The predator lowered its head to ground and closed its eyes for a moment. Darkness pressed at the edges of its vision, threatening to pull it down into unconsciousness. It resisted. To collapse now would be dangerous. The plain was never empty for long. Scavengers watched from the distance, their eyes gleaming in the failing light. A pack of small feathered creatures chattered nervously along the rocks, eager to rush in, but afraid of the hunter still standing. They could smell weakness, yet they also smelled dominance. The victor still guarded its prize. Slowly it turned back to the carcass and fed. Flesh tore easily under its teeth, though each bite sent fire through its jaw. The rival's body offered enough food to last days, perhaps even longer. For the first time in many suns, the gnawing hunger that had shadowed its every step began to ease. Strength would return if it could hold this ground long enough. That was the challenge now. Winning the battle had been one struggle. Keeping the victory was another. The sun had nearly vanished, painting the sky with deep crimson streaks. Darkness spread over the plain. From the distance came the low call of other hunters. The Allosaurus raised its blood-stained head and scanned the horizon. Shapes moved beyond the haze, shadows circling. They smelled the feast. Some would come soon. The predator dragged the carcass closer to the broken tree, using what strength it had left. The trunk and jagged rocks offered a thin shield. It was not much, but it would help. Night deepened. Stars pricked the sky. The victorious hunter lay close to its killed body, curled around the meat. Each wound throbbed with heat, and every shallow breath carried pain. Yet beneath the suffering there was calm. The greatest threat was gone. Its rival, the one that had stolen prey and cast its shadow over every hunt, would never rise again. Still the night tested it. Jackal-like scavengers crept forward, yipping in the dark. The Allosaurus bared its teeth in silent warning. When they pressed too close, it lunged with sudden fury, scattering them into the shadows. It staggered after the rush heart, pounding ribs, aching, yet the sight of the scavengers fleeing filled it with strength. The land was listening. Every creature would soon know who ruled here. By dawn the plain had changed. The body of the rival was half-eaten ribs exposed to the air. Flies buzzed in endless clouds. The smaller predators stood watchful, still bleeding, but alive. Vultures circled overhead, unwilling to challenge the scarred guardian. In the distance, herds moved cautiously, their eyes turning toward the carcass before drifting back to grazing. Life continued as it always did, but beneath it all the balance of power had shifted. The predator lifted its head toward the rising sun. Warm light spread across its wounds and across the land. Each breath was painful but steady. It had survived the storm. It had earned its place through blood and resolve. Now it could rest, rebuild, and rule. The plain had returned to its quiet rhythm, but it was not the same place it had been before the battle. The air no longer carried the scent of fear from the smaller Allosaurus. Instead, it carried the raw, sharp scent of power. The carcass of the fallen rival had long been reduced to bones bleached beneath the sun. Vultures picked at the scraps, and smaller scavengers had scattered the remains, but the memory of that clash remained etched into land like scars carved into stone. Every creature that passed through this stretch of earth carried that knowledge with them. The Allosaurus walked slower, now its body marked by scars that would never fade. Each movement bore the weight of pain, but it also carried new authority. Herds parted more quickly when it approached. Packs of smaller predators no longer tested its strength. The message had spread through the plain. This was a place ruled by one hunter alone. The balance of life had shifted in favor of the scarred survivor. Yet survival was more than dominance. To thrive, the Archosaurus had to adapt. Weeks passed, and its wounds began to heal those stiff lines of scarred tissue tugged against its muscles. It hunted with new patience, no longer rushing recklessly into chases. The memory of blood and exhaustion had taught it caution. It chose targets wisely, striking at the weak or the distracted. What once had been hunger-driven desperation became calculated mastery. Seasons turned. The dry winds gave way to storms and then back again. Grass sprouted in patches across the plain, and rivers swelled before shrinking once more. Through it all, the Archosaurus endured. Each hunt fed not only its body but its reputation. Other predators kept their distance. Even scavengers watched silently before daring to close in after it had eaten. This was not simply survival anymore. It was legacy being carved into bones of the land itself. On one cool evening, the Archosaurus stood at the ridge overlooking the plain. The sky glowed with streaks of gold and violet as the sun slipped below the horizon. Herds stretched across the distance, grazing without fear. In that moment, the predator did not move to strike. It did not lower itself into a hunt. It only watched, listening to the pulse of the land. The stillness was a kind of triumph. Power was no longer just about killing. Power was a freedom to endure, to command silence, to be unchallenged. A gust of wind swept across its scarred hide. It closed its eyes and lifted its head, feeling the weight of the past fall behind. The rival that had once threatened its survival was gone. The endless hunger that had once driven reckless choices was satisfied. The plain was not without danger, and life would always demand struggle, yet the Archosaurus had proven that it could rise above each test. It had claimed its place through blood, through pain, and through relentless will. As night fell, the stars shimmered above, and the land stretched endlessly in every direction. Somewhere beyond the horizon, other predators hunted and fought their own battles. But here in this domain, the Archosaurus reigned. Its scars told the story of survival. Its presence carved fear into rivals and respect into every herd that roamed. Life would continue to challenge it, yet for now it stood as the silent ruler of the plain, a living testament to the price of victory and the strength to endure. The story of the Scar Hunter would not be told in words, but in the way the land itself shifted around its shadow, in the way herds parted at its approach, in the silence of rivals who chose not to fight, and in the bones of the fallen that marked the ground as reminders of battles won. The Archosaurus had not only survived, it had become legend written into the earth.